Put the pieces back together, fit them against each other chip by chip and line by line, and they start to sing. There's a sort of tone a skeleton gives off. Aretha Hausen can feel it more than hear it, like it's tuned to some frequency she can't quite register. It resonates through her in layers: skin, muscle, cartilage, bone. It whispers in her ear at night, secret, liquid, like blood through a shell. The site they're working on is probably early Arctic minus 6,500 BP or so, going strictly by contents, thus beating out the recent Bug River find by almost 2,000 years, up above the waterline, too, which makes it incredibly unlikely. Most people lived in lakeshore camps back then, right when the water levels were at their lowest after the remnant ice mass from the last glacial advance lying across the eastern outlet of Lake Superior finally wasted away, causing artificially high lake levels to drop over 100 meters. Then isostatic rebound led to a gradual return, which is why most sites dating between the end of the Paleo-Indian period and 4,000 years ago are largely underwater. Not this one, though. It's tucked up under a ridge of granite, surrounded by conifer old growth so dense they had to park the vehicles a mile away and cut their way in on foot, trying to disturb as little as possible. Almost a month later, a hideously cold, rainy October, heading straight for Halloween. The air still stinks of sap, stumps bleeding like wounds. Dr. Anne Mary Begg's people hauled the trunks out one by one, cross-cut the longest ones, then loaded them up and took them back to the reserve, where they'll be planed in the traditional manner and used for rebuilding. Always a lot of home improvement projects on the go over that way. That's what Anne-Marie, Dr. Beggs, says. Though Canadian ethics laws largely forbid excavations, once Begg brought Dr. Elise Lewin in to consult, even the local elders had to agree this particular discovery merited looking into. They've been part of the same team practically since Begg was Lewin's favorite TA, operating together out of Lakehead University, Thunder Bay. Lewin's adept at handling funding and expedition planning, while Begg handles both tribal liaison duties and general PR, plus almost anything else to do with the media. It was Begg who sowed excitement about Pandora's box, as the pits come to be called, on account of the flat slab of granite, lightly incised with what looked like ancestral petroglyphs, similar to those found on Kejartalik Island in the Arctic, stoppering it like a bottle. Incised on top and below, as Aretha herself discovered when they pried it apart, opening a triangular gap large enough to let her jump in. She'd shone the flashlight downwards first, just far enough to check her footing before she landed, down on one knee, a soggy crouch, too cramped to straighten fully, then automatically reversed it, revealing those square-cut, coldly eyeless faces set in silent judgment right above her head. How'd they get it here? Morgan, the other intern, asks Lewin, who shrugs and glances at Begg before letting her answer. The slab itself, that's found, not made, shaped a little, probably. More than enough rockfall in this area for that post-glacial shear. Then they'd have made an earthwork track like at Stonehenge, dug underneath. Begg uses her hands to sketch the movements in midair, then piled in front, put down logs over top, use them like rollers. Get enough people pushing and pulling, you're golden. Lewin nods. Yes, exactly. Once the grave was dug, there'd be no particular problem fitting it over top. Just increase the slope till they had a hill and push it up over the edge, down-angled so one side touched the opposite lip before dismantling the hill to lay it flat again. Morgan turns slightly, indicating. What are the carvings for, though? Like, what do they mean? Votive totems, Begg replies with confidence. The forensics expert, Dr. Tatiana Hukulak, just shakes her head. No way to know, she counters. Told us yourself they don't look like any of the ritual marks you grew up with, remember? So it's like a sign in Chinese. For all of us, just as likely to say fuck you as God bless, unless you know Pinyin. Beg's already opening her mouth to argue when Lewin sees Aretha's hand go up. She shushes them both. "Oh dear, you don't have to do that," she exclaims. "Just sing out if an idea struck you." Aretha hesitates, eyes flicking to Morgan, who nods. "Courage in hand," she replies. Maybe. I mean, even when you don't know the language, there's still a lot you can get from context, right? Well, she hauls herself up, far enough past the slab to tap its top, nails grating slightly over rough-edged stone. "Keep out, that'd be my guess," she concludes, "'cause it's up here." Lewin nods as Hukulek and Beg exchange glances. Logical. And down there, on the underside. Here Aretha shrugs, uncomfortably in the spotlight for once, pinned beneath the full weight of all three professors' eyes. "Stay in," she suggests, finally. Working this dig with Lewin's team was supposed to be the best job placement ever. A giddy dream of an archaeological internship, government work with her way paid up front, hands-on experience, and the chance to literally uncover something unseen since thousands of years BCE. By the end of the first week, however, Aretha was already beginning to dream about smothering almost everyone else in their sleep or hanging herself from the next convenient tree. And the only thing that's improved since then is that she's now far too exhausted to attempt either. Doesn't help that the rain which greeted them on arrival still continues, cold and constant, everything covered in mud and reeking of pine needles. Sometimes it dims to a fine mist, penetrating skin deep through Aretha's heaviest raincoat. Always it chills, lighting her bone marrow up with sharp threads of ache. The air around her so cold, it hurts to inhale through an open mouth. Kneeling here in the mud, she sees her breath boil up as cones fall down through the dripping many-quilled branches, their sticky impacts signaled with rifle shot cracks, and every day starts the same, ends the same. Wood mold burning in her eyes, and sinuses like smoke, impossible to ward off, especially since the Benadryl ran out. "Jesus," Morgan suddenly exclaims, like she just hasn't noticed it before. "That's one hell of a cold you've got there, Ree." Does Lewin know? Aretha shrugs, droplets scattering. Hard to do much else, when she's up to her elbows in grave gunk. And, "Oh, well, yeah, sure," she replies, vaguely. Can't see how she wouldn't. Close quarters and all. "You're probably right. But who knows, huh? I mean," Morgan trails off, eyes sliding back to the main tent, over which two very familiar voices are starting to rise, yet again, before returning to the task at hand. She's kinda distracted these days with everything, I guess. Guess so. Inside the main tent, Beg and Hukulek are going at each other like ideological hammer and tongs. As ever, same shit, different day, latest installment in an infinite series. It's been a match made in hell pretty much since the beginning. Hukulek's specialization makes her view all human remains as an exploitable resource, while Beg's tribal band liaison status puts her in charge of making sure everything that could conceivably once have been a person gets put right back where it was found after cataloging, with an absolute minimum of ancestral disrespect. Of course, Beg's participation is basically the only reason they're all here in the first place, as Lewin makes sure to keep reminding Hukulek. But from Hukulek's point of view, just because she knows it's true doesn't mean she has to pretend to like it. I'll point out yet again, Hukulek saying right now, teeth audibly gritted, that the single easiest way we could get a verifiable date on this site continues to be if we could take some of the bones back and carbon date them in an honest-to-Christ lab. Aretha can almost see Beg curtly shaking her head, braids swinging, the way she does about 50 times a day, on average, as she replies, "Carbon date the grave goods, then, tat, to your heart's content. Carbon date the shit out of them. Okay. Grind them down to paste if you want to, burn them, and smoke the fucking ashes. But the bones themselves, those stay here. Oh, 'Cause one of them might share maybe 0.1 out of 100,000th part of their genetic material with yours. Bitch, please. Lewin's voice here, smooth and placatory as ever. Ladies, let's be civil, shall we? We all have to work together, after all, for a good month more. Unfortunately, Hooky-like snaps back, probably making Beg puff up like a porcupine, hurling back in her turn. Hey, don't denigrate my spirituality just because you don't share it. Is that so hard? Say we were in Africa, digging up Rwandan massacre dumps. Things be different then, right? You know, funny thing about that, Anne-Marie. Not really. They'd be the same way any place for me, because I am a scientist, first and foremost. Full friggin' stop. And I'm not is what you mean. Well, if the moccasin fits. At that, Aretha whips her head around sharply, only to meet Morgan's equally disbelieving gaze halfway. The both of them staring at each other, like, seriously. Holy cultural slap fight with potential impending fisticuffs, Batman. Wow. Knockdown, drag out by 6, 7 at the latest, Morgan mutters, sidelong. I'm calling it now, 50 on tat to win, unless Anne-Marie puts her down with the first punch. You in or what? Aretha hisses out something that can't quite be called a laugh. Pass, thanks. Morgan shrugs, then turns back to her designated task, head shaking slightly. Your loss. Going by her initial pitch, Lewin genuinely seems to have thought hiring only female associates and students would guarantee this little trip going far more smoothly than most, as though removing all traces of testosterone from the equation would create some sort of paradisiacal meeting of hearts and minds. Cycles cinched, hands kept busy, no muss, no fuss. The principle, however, was flawed from its inception. Just 'cause they ain't no peckers don't mean ain't no peckin' order, as Aretha's aunties have often been heard to remark round the all-gal sewing circle they run after hours out of their equally all-girl cleaning services head office. It frankly amazes Aretha how Lewin could ever have gotten the idea that women never bring such divisive qualities as ambition, wrath, or lust to the metaphorical table, when she spent the bulk of her career teaching at all-girl facilities across the U.S., before finally ranging up over the border. But whatever. Maybe Lewin's really one of those ego-psych nuts underneath the second-wave feminist frosting, forever hell-bent on mistaking biology for destiny, no matter the context. Just as well, she's apparently never thought to wonder exactly what those pills Aretha keeps choking down each day are, if so. On puberty blockers since relatively early diagnosis, thank Christ, so she never did reach the sort of giveaway heights her older brothers have, and her voice hasn't changed all that much, either. That plus no Adam's apple, facial and body hair kept chemically downy as any natal female in her immediate family, even if the other team members felt inclined to body police. But the plain fact is, they've none of them seen each other in any sort of disarray since they left base camp. It's too cold to strip for sleep, let alone to shower, assuming they even had one. This is typical paranoia, though, and she knows it. The reason everyone here knows her as Aretha is because she is. That's the name under which she entered university, legally, and it'll be the name with which she graduates, just like from high school. She's a long damn way away from where she was born at this point, both literally and figuratively. Aretha looks back up to find Morgan still looking at her and blushes, sniffing liquid, with nothing handy even halfway clean enough to wipe the result away on. Sorry, she manages, after a second. So gross, I know, I really do. Sorry, God. Morgan laughs. Dude, it's fine. Who knew, right? Yeah. A pause. Think it would have been okay, probably. It just hadn't rained the whole fucking time. And yet. Morgan has a great smile, really. Aretha'd love to see it closer up sometime, under different circumstances. But right now, the little moment of connection under pressure already had, the only thing either of them can really think to do about it is just shrug a little and drift apart once more. Morgan back towards the generator array, which is starting to make those worrying pre-brownout noises yet again, while Aretha heaves herself up out of the pit and stamps slushily towards the tent itself, planning to sluice her gloved hands under the tarp's overflowing gutter. This brings her so close to the ongoing argument that she can finally see what the various players are actually doing through that space where the tent's ill-laid side gates open. Beg and Hukulek squaring off, with Lewin playing referee. It's not quite at the catfight stage yet, but if Morgan's placing bets, Aretha's at least setting her watch. "Look, Anne-Marie," Hukulek says finally, "I know you want to think these are your people outside, in the grave. But I've been studying them hands-on for weeks now, and I just don't think they were at all. I don't think these were anybody's people. Jesus, Tat. What the hell kind of othering? Colonialist bullshit. No, but seriously. Seriously." Hukulak points to a pelvic arrangement, a crushed flat skull, and as much of the spinal column as they've been able to find. Pelvis slung backwards, like a bird, not a mammal. Orbital sockets fully 10 nil larger than usual and side-positioned, not to the front. These people were barely binocular, probably had to cock their heads just to look at something in front of them. Twice as many teeth, half of them canines. Back ones serrated. This is a meat eater exclusively. And that's not even getting into the number of vertebrae. Projection processes to the front and rear of each, locking them together like a snake's. You've got 3 bodies to look at, barely, and you're already pushing taxonomic boundaries. Phylogenetic analysis by traits is a slanted system and makes it too easy by far to mistake clades or haplogroups for whole separate species. Ooh, bad move, Dr. Begg. Aretha thinks, even as that last sentence starts, and indeed, by its end, Hukulek's eyes have widened so far, her smile lines disappear completely. "Oh really, is it?" She all but spits. "Golly gee, I didn't know that. Please tell me more." "Hottentot Venus what?" "You know what I'm saying." "I know exactly what you're saying, yes. Do you know what I'm saying? Or did you just start shoving your fingers in your ears and singing la 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 la, I can't Heeeearu the minute I started talking as usual?" Begg snorts, explosively. "You've seen the dig. Every damn day for a month. It's a grave, Tat, you just used the word yourself. Full of grave goods. Animals don't do that, if that's what you're implying."
Of course I'm not saying what's in there is animals. For shit's sake, an offshoot of humanity, maybe, some evolutionary dead end. Like Australopithecus. You're telling me Australopithecus had snake spines? No. But just because we haven't found something yet doesn't mean it never existed. Good line, Agent Mulder. Oh fuck you, you condescending, indigenocentric fuck. Lewin braces her hands and goes to interpose between them, but they ignore her roundly, both wider as well as darker, more built for the long haul, able to shrug her off like a Charlie horse. Oculus glares up as Begg stares down, hands on hips and braids still swinging, and demands, "Seriously, is that what we're down to, right now? The black girl and the Indian, calling each other out as racists?"
Hukulak twitches like she's about to start throwing elbows, trying to divert the urge to punch first and answer questions later. The movement's actually violent enough to rock Begg back a micro-step, make her start to flinch involuntarily, right before she catches herself. "You first," is all Hukulek replies, finally, voice flat. And, ladies, Lewin puts in again, a tad more frantically. "We're scientists here, yes. Professionals. We can differ, even quarrel. But with respect, always respect. This is all simply theory for now." Now it's Hukulek's turn to snort. "Forever she gets her way," she replies. "And she will. Bet your ass." Begg agrees. "'Cause this is Kitchenomekuzib in Innuug First Nation land, and that's not a theory. So those bones go right on back in the ground where we found them, just like your government promised. No debate." Lewin looks at Hukulek. Hukulek looks away. "Never actually thought there would be," she mutters under her breath. The grave goods Hukulek finds so uninteresting are typical early archaic, a predominance of less extensively flaked stone tools with a distinct lack of pottery and smoking pipes, new-style lanceolate projectile points with corner notches and serration along the side of the blades, suitable to a mixture of coniferous and deciduous forests, increased reliance on local chert sources. What's odd about it, however, is the sheer size of the overall deposit. Far more end scrapers, side scrapers, crude celts, stone axes, and polished stone atlatl weight tubes than seem necessary for a mere family burial, which is what the three bodies Begg talked about would indicate. One male, one female, one sexually indistinct adolescent, its pelvis missing, possibly scavenged by animals before the capstone was laid. Folded beneath a blanketing layer of grave goods so large it almost appears to act as a secondary grounding weight, the three bodies nevertheless take pride of place. Traces of red ochre still visible on and around all three rather than just the male skeleton, as would be customary. Weirder yet, on closer examination, the same sort of ochre appears to have been painstakingly applied not only to the flensed bones themselves, but also to all the grave goods as well, before they were piled on top. In burials from pre-dynastic Egypt to prehistoric Britain, Aretha knows, red ochre was used to symbolize blood. Skeletons were flensed and decorated with it, as both a sign of respect and of propitiation, a potential warding off of vampiric ghosts. Take this instead, leave us ours. With no real sense of an afterlife, the prehistoric dead in general were thought to be eternally jealous, resentful of, and predatory towards the living, but particularly so if they died young or unjustly, and thus been cheated of everything more they might have accomplished while alive. Like the Lady of Kao, Aretha thinks, or the so-called Scythian princess, both of whom died in their 20s, both personages of unusual power, the former the first high-status woman found in Moche culture, the latter actually a Siberian priestess buried in silk and fur and gold, and both of whose tombs also contain the most precious grave good of all, startlingly common across cultures from Mesoamerican to Hindu to Egyptian to Asian. More corpses, often showing signs of recent violent sacrificial death. Retainer sacrifice, that's what they call it. Aretha thinks, her head spinning slightly, skull gone hot and numb under its cold, constantly wet cap of skin. Like slaughtering horses so they can draw the princess's chariot into the underworld, except with people. Concubines, soldiers, servants, slaves, maybe chosen by lots, maybe volunteers, killing for company on that final long day's journey into whatever night comes next. In Egypt, eventually, they started substituting Shoapti figures instead, magic clay dolls incised with spells swapped in for actual corpses, an image of a thing just as good as the thing itself, unless it's not. Text taking shape behind her eyes, wavering. She can almost see it on her laptop screen, or maybe even a page somewhere, whatever reference method she first encountered this information through. How in Mound 72 at Cahokia, largest site of the Mississippian culture, 800 to 1600 CE, located near modern St. Louis, Missouri, pits were found filled with mass burials. 53 young women, strangled and neatly arranged in 2 layers. 39 men, women, and children, unceremoniously dumped, with several showing signs of not having been fully dead when buried, of having tried to claw their way back out. Another group of 4 individuals was neatly arranged on litters made of cedar poles and cane matting, arms interlocked with heads and hands removed. Most spectacular is the Birdman, a tall man in his 40s, thought to have been an important early Cahokian ruler. He was buried on an elevated platform, covered by a bed of more than 20,000 marine shell disc beads arranged in the shape of a falcon, with the bird's head appearing beneath the man's head, its wings and tail beneath his arms and legs. Below the Birdman, another corpse was found, buried facing downward, while surrounding him were piles of elaborate grave goods. Cahokia was a trade center, of course. The apex of an empire. Makes sense they'd do things big, lay on the bling, This, meanwhile, this is different, smaller, meaner. The faces of the three prime skeletons have been smashed, deliberately, as if in an attempt to make them unrecognizable, a spasm of disgust or desecration. God knows, Aretha spent more than enough time piecing them back together to know how effective that first attack was, how odd that it should be followed up with what reads as an almost equally violent avalanche of reverence. But then there's the capstone, the lid, the flensing, and the ochre, plus the ochre-saturated grave goods pile itself, all added later, at what had to be great cost to the givers, like a belated apology. No retainers, though. Not here. Not where anybody's thought to look, as yet. This last thought jolts Aretha out of half-sleep at last, making her sit up so sharply she almost falls over, a blinding surge of pain stitching temple to temple. She holds herself still on her sleeping bag, breathing as slowly as possible to thwart nausea. She presses her fingers up against the edge of her eye sockets until white dots flicker behind her eyelids, forcing the pain back by pressure and sheer will, until, gradually, the agony recedes. The minute she's able, she slits her boots back on, grabs her excavation spade and trowel, and ducks out of her tent. The mist, cool on her flushed face, brings a moment's relief. Not sure if her giddiness is inspiration or fever, Aretha heads for the grave pit as fast as she can. The light is dimming. She won't have long. She can't see anybody working, which suggests they're at dinner in the chow tent. But no, not all of them, it turns out, because as she pauses by the main tent, she can hear Dr. Begg arguing with someone yet again, over the sat phone this time. Ooh, curiosity gets the better of her. She edges up to the tent's outer wall, holding her breath. Don't know who she knows, is my point. Game, Begg says. Aretha frowns, translating. Game for grandmother, the elder who helped swing the tribal council towards permitting this dig in the first place. Aretha's never heard Begg sound this uncomfortable with her. But if it's somebody with enough clout, somebody who decides they don't want to honor the arrangement anymore, she stops, sighs. Might be more money involved, sure. Maybe not. And maybe money's not what we should be thinking about right now. A longer pause. Well, you saw the pictures, right? Yeah, they're the ones Tat already sent. So if people start agreeing with her, a beat. Okay, what? No, I'm not going to do that. No, because this is science, not story time. That's why. And by those standards, what Tat says makes sense. Muddying the waters with mythology isn't going to. Hey, you there? Hello? Hello? No reply, obviously. The receiver slams down. Bang. Sometimes, the foam cuts out for no reason, even with satellite help, vagaries of location, technology, all that. Oh, fuck me, Begg mutters, and goes trudging away, still swearing at herself under her breath. Mythology. There was a moment, back in week 1. Yes, she remembers it now. Sitting around the one smoking campfire they'd ever risked as the tarp above dipped and sloshed. Lewin asking Begg to fill in the tribal history of this particular area, and Begg replying, slightly snappish, that there wasn't one. As such, lots of stories, that's all. Heroes and monsters, that kind of shit. We don't go up there much, that place, 'cause of the... And a word here, something Aretha'd never heard before, clipped and odd. Buak, Pagak, Bagak, something like that. Bakak. Bakak in Ojibwe, Pekek in Algonquin, a version of Begg's voice corrected, from somewhere deep inside. It's an Anishinaabe Adazukan, a fairy tale. They split the difference, usually, and call it Bakak. Like the Wendigo, Morgan suggested, but Begg shook her head. The point of the Wendigo, she replied, was that a Wendigo started out human, while the Bakak never was. It's a bunch of puns stuck together. Bakak means skeleton, bones draped in skin. Thus Bakakadozo, to be thin, skinny, poor, or Bakakadwing, to have a thin face. Bikakadwadwezid, an extremely thin being. Not to mention how it yells shrilly in the night, Bagakuwin, literally clear or distinct cries, and beats warriors to death with a club. Bagakwaij flings its victim's chest open Bakakwakiganej to eat their liver. Why the liver? Aretha asked, but Beg just shrugged. Why any damn thing? It's a bougie man, so it has to do something gross. Like giants grinding bones to make their bread. You could do that, you know, as long as you added flour. Hukulak put in, from the fire pit's far side. Just a flatbread, though. Bone meal won't bond with yeast. Thank you, Martha Stewart. Is that what Beg's grandmother just said, over the phone? That the skeletons look like Baycocks. That Hukulek's right, and also wrong. That Beg. Oh, but Aretha's head is burning now, bright and hot, like the Wendigo's legendary feet of fire. So hot the raindrops should sizzle on her skin, except they don't. They just keep on falling, soft, sharp, solid points of cold pocking down through the sodden, pine-scented air. And the pit gaping open for her at her feet, a toothless, mud-filled mouth. She drops to her knees, scrambles over the lip, slides down messily inside. By the time Morgan comes by it's, well, later. Aretha doesn't know by how much, but the light's just about completely gone, and she's long since been reduced to scraping blindly away at the grave's interior walls with her gloved fingers. She looks up to see Morgan blinking down at her through a flashlight beam, and smiles, or thinks she does. Her face is far too rigid numb at this point for it to be any sort of certainty. "Lo, Morgan," she calls up, not stopping. "How was dinner?" Okay. What? What are you doing down there?" Exactly. I have to dig." "Yeah, I can see that. Are you okay?" "You don't look okay." "I feel okay, though. Mainly. I mean," Aretha takes a second to shake her head, almost pausing. The pit walls blur on either side of her, heave dangerously like they're breathing. Then, "It doesn't matter," she concludes, mainly to herself, and goes back to her appointed task. All right." Morgan steps back, raising her voice incrementally with each new name. "Tat, Dr. Hukulak, come on over here for a minute, will you? Like, right now. Anne-Marie, Dr. Lewin." They cluster around the edge like flies on a wound, staring in as Aretha just keeps on keeping on, almost up to her wrists now in muck. "Aretha," Dr. Lewin begins at last. "You do know we mapped out that area already, yes? Since a week ago. I remember, Doctor. You took the measurements, as I recall." "I remember." "Okay, so stop, damn it. Hukulek orders. You hear me? Look at what you're doing, for Christ's sake." Anne-Marie. Bay, however, simply shakes her head, hunkering down. "Shut up, Tat," she says, without turning. To Aretha. "Hausen, It's Aretha, right?" Aretha nods. "Aretha, did you maybe hear me before? Up there, on the sat phone?" "Yes, Dr. Beg." "Aha. Shit. Look. The Baycock's just a story, It's folklore. You're not gonna find a, separate bunch of human bones in there. Is that what you're thinking? Like a larder? Still scratching? I'm not thinking that, no." "Then what are you thinking?" Aretha wipes mud off on her cheek, gets some in her mouth, spits brown. "Sacrifice," she answers, once her lips are clear again. "Like at Cahokia, slaves for the underworld, not food. But then again, who knows? Might have been both." "Aha. How long you been down there, "I don't know. How long did they coexist, Neanderthals and Homo habilis? 'Cause they did, right? I'm right about that. Lived long enough to share the same lands, even interbreed, enough so some people have Neanderthal DNA. That's the current theory." Lewin agrees, sharing a quick, dark look with Beg. The hell's she saying? Hukulek demands of Lewin, at almost the same time. Police, don't you vet your damn volunteers. We need to get her out, back to the res at least, get her airlifted somewhere. Just shut up, Tat. Beg repeats, still not turning. Morgan, you're her friend, on my count, okay. 1, 2. But that precisely is when the wall of the grave pit finally gives way, releases a sudden avalanche of half-liquid earth that sweeps Eritha back, pins her under, crowns and crushes her alike on a swift, dark flood of roots and stones and bones, bones, bones. Here they are. I was right. She barely has time to think, reeling, delirious, her arms full of trophies, struggling to raise them high. See, I was right. They're here. We're here. But who's that? Back a little further beyond her team's shocked rim ring, peering down on her as well. That tall, thin figure with its cocked head, its burning, side-set eyes, its featureless face carved from jet-black stone. She hears it scream in her mind, thin but distinct, a far-flung cry, the wail of every shattered skull piece laid back together and set ringing, tuned to some distant tone. Shell bell, blood hiss, words made flesh, at long last. Here, yes, as we always have been, as we always will. Eretha comes back to herself slowly, lying on a cot in the main tent, pain-paralyzed. Hurt all over, inside and out. The out is mainly bruises, scrapes, a general wrenched ache. But the inside, that's something different. Like the world's worst yeast infection, a spike through her bladder, paving her up the middle, and watching her writhe. Her whole system clenched at once against her own core, a furled agony seed, forever threatening to bloom. She'd whimper, even weep, but she can barely bear to breathe, which at least makes it easier, to keep quiet while the others talk around her, above her, about her. Baycock, ha, Dr. Hukulek saying, while Dr. Beg makes a weird snorting noise. Looks more like a damn prehistoric serial killer's dump site, to me. And how'd she know where to dig, anyhow? Morgan, she said she had a dream. Whispered it when I was taking her vitals. Dr. Lewin sounds worried. Eretha wishes she thought it was for the right reasons. Yes, as to that, how bad's her damage? That's one way to put it, Hukulek mutters as Morgan draws a breath, then replies, well, she's fine, I guess, believe it or not. Physically, anyway. What about thee? Morgan's voice gets harder. Those scars are old, not fresh, surgical, and none of our business. Lewin sighs. If they mean what I think they mean, I'm not happy with her choice to misrepresent herself on the project application form. Can we not use bullshit scare quotes, please? Morgan asks. I mean, check the university rules and regs, doc. Pronouns are up to the individual these days. Is biology. Eretha is female, just because she says she is. Yeah, Dr. L, that's exactly what that means. Just like a multiracial person's black if they say they are, or anybody's a Christian if they say so, even if they don't go to church. The fierceness in Morgan's voice puts a lump in Eretha's throat. She cracks her eyes open, tries to find words to thank her with, but her lips won't work. All that comes out is a dry clicking, some insect clearing its throat from inside her mouth. But Hukulek's already moved into the pause anyhow, adding, like those things in the pit'd be human, if they could say so. At this, Beg turns, confronting her. Excuse me, things. We're back there again. What the fuck happened to parallel evolution? Oh, I don't know. Tell me again how your elders think of them as ancestors, Anne-Marie. Tell me they don't call them monsters. Sure, okay. This is Baycock country. Like I said that first week, which is why somebody non-tribal, some hiker from Toronto, literally had to stumble over the capstone for us to even know it was here, and why we had to cut our way in after. But all that proves is that superstition's a powerful thing. My gammy's in her 80s, and frankly, When it comes to archaeology, she doesn't know what she's talking about. Hukulek scoffs. Yeah, and Schliemann never found 8 different versions of Troy by looking where Homer said to, either. Oh, so what folktales are fact disguised is that the song we're singing. Schliemann using the Iliad as a guidebook was the exception, not the rule. He got lucky, and what he found was not what he'd been looking for either, which is exactly what's happened here, all over. Well, in point of fact, no. You heard Aretha. Retainer sacrifice, like in 100 other places. And do you really think we need monsters for that? For once, Veg sounds more exhausted than angry. It's classic painted bird syndrome. Tat. Whatever makes a person different enough from the herd to be rendered. Pariah, alien, monstrous. This little family with their wide-spaced eyes and their snake spines, or my Gammy, when she came back from residential school, haircut and wearing white kid clothes, barely able to speak her own language anymore. Or Aretha here, for that matter. Once Elise got a look at her chest. Lewin lifts her hands. Don't bring me into this, please. But you're already in it. We all are. Now it's Hukulek's turn to sound uncharacteristic, all her usual snark gone. With some difficulty, Aretha turns her head, sees the woman bent down over something long, grayish-brown, and filthy. One of the freshly dug bones, plucked from a teetery, cross-stacked pyramid of such, off the gurney she stands next to. I mean, I'd need to do a full lab workup to verify, but some of these remains, they still have flesh on them, under the muck, like non-mummified flesh. Dr. Lewin, blinking. You mean they're recent? Yeah. But they were buried. How? You tell me. Anne-Marie. Beg opens and closes her mouth. Well, she starts. That's obviously. Okay. I mean that's. She deflates, slumping. I don't know what that is, she says at last, near inaudibly. You'd think Hukulek would be proud to have thrown her chief rival off so thoroughly, but no, she looks equally taken aback, almost scared. Lewin just stands there, studying the tent's tarp floor, like she's misplaced something above. Rain drums the roof, incessant, a dull cold tide. Morgan's gaze flicks from one to the next as the silence stretches ever more thin, disbelieving, till it finally falls on Aretha. And her eyes widen. Shit. You're awake. She hurries over to the cot and kneels down, stroking Aretha's forehead. How you feeling, babe? Babe. In Morgan's mouth, the word sounds good enough to make Aretha cry, or want to. Hurts. She husks instead through chapped lips. All through my groin, lower abdomen. She tries to move and hisses, agony spiking her joints. Elbows and knees, ankles too. Morgan puts the inside of one wrist to Aretha's forehead, then takes her pulse. Aretha's creeped out by how pale her own wrist looks when hefted slackly in the tense lantern light, its veins slightly distended and purpled. Fever feels like it's gone down, at least, Morgan tells her, attempting an unconvincing smile. But since that's as far as my Girl Guide first aid training goes, all I can tell you beyond that is you need a hospital, like now. Dr. Begg, is the sat phone working again? No, not yet. Fine. You know what? It's half an hour back to the access road. Give me the damn thing, and I'll get it to where it can get a signal out. Then call an airlift to get her down to Thunder Bay. Lewin puts a hand to her mouth, Victorian as all hell. Oh dear, not at night, in this rain. What if you get lost, slip and fall, or... Ma'am, I'll be fine. My boots are hiking rated. Seriously. No, Morgan, trust me, bad idea. Hukulek says, Beg nodding agreement. Wait for daybreak, for the weather to clear. That'll free up the signal link. Both stop as Morgan, already bent to lace her boots tighter, slashes one hand across the air. I have a compass and a map, she tells them, not looking up, a flashlight, a knife, and I'm not gonna melt. Plus, it's safer on foot than trying to drive when it's like this. Anybody wants to go instead of me. I'm amenable, but you better speak now or forever hold your peace. Ree's my friend, and I'm not putting her through 1 second more of this than we have to. Straightening, she glares round, hands on hips, but no one objects. So she stuffs the blocky sat phone away and ducks down with a shrug instead, planting a swift kiss on Aretha's forehead, too light to fully track, here and then gone, almost hallucinatory. Like a promise. See you soon, she murmurs, swinging her knapsack onto her back. No, that same voice hisses from inside Aretha's mind. We think not. Aretha doesn't remember falling asleep. When she wakes, the pain has diminished astonishingly, not gone, still twinging through her hips and knees when she swings herself into a tentative sitting position, but so much less. It's near euphoric. She feels lightheaded, insubstantial. Even the forest's damp pine reek doesn't burn the way it used to. For a few moments, she simply enjoys breathing with something like her normal ease. Then she sees the light, or lack thereof, the similar lack of company. No sat phone on the table, just dirt and bones. No Morgan. Shit. Wrapping the sleeping bag around her like a puffy cloak, she stumbles out into open air, for once blessedly free of rain. No visible sky between the trees, but there's less sinus drag, hewing a possible shift in air pressure. Lewin, Beg, and Hukulek are huddled around a Coleman stove, maybe 10 feet away. Clustered gnats and moths flying up like sparks. Lewin turns as Aretha nears, almost smiling as she recognizes her, which is odd but welcome. Things must be bad. Aretha, she calls out, voice only a little strained on the up note. You look better than you did. Aretha clears her throat, even as the other two shoot Lewin looks whose subtext both clearly read, "Are you fucking kidding me?" "Thanks," she manages finally. Then, "Morgan?" Lewin sighs. "No, dear. Not yet." "How long?" 2 hours, maybe 3, Hukulek replies. Anne-Marie went out looking, but I didn't find her, Beg says, a bit too quickly, too flat. Not her. Aretha nods, swallows again. No spit. What did you find? She asks. Tracks, that's the answer. About 5 minutes walk from the camp. They're narrow but deep, as if carved, each a slipper full of dark liquid, welling up from underground. The soil is saturated here, Aretha can only suppose, after a solid 4.5 weeks of precipitation. But there's something about the marks, both familiar and They look wrong, somehow, turned upside down. They're backwards, she observes, at last. Bends closer, just a bit, and wavers, not trusting herself to be able to crouch. The water throws back light. Hukulek's beam crossing Lewin's as Beg hovers next to them, holding back, waiting to see if Aretha can eventually identify that particular Winnie shade without prompting. Not water, Aretha says, throat clicking drier yet, and Beg shakes her head. No, she confirms, and Aretha dips further, sniffing hard. Smells rust, and rot, and meat. Blood. Lewin recoils, almost tripping, but Hukulek stands her ground, demanding. And you didn't think to tell us? The fuck, Anne-Marie. Beg stays where she is, rooted fast, as though every ounce of protest in her has long since drained out through her heels. Doesn't even bother shrugging. Not much point, she says, simply. You'd have found out eventually, too, once either of you thought to ask. But Aretha here's been a whole lot better at that than most of us throughout, hasn't she? Which is sort of interesting, in context. How so? Things my gammy told me over the years, that's all, about this area. Stuff I discounted automatically, pretty much, because, well, you know why, tat. Because science. Empirical data versus subjective belief, all that. Because I've tried so fucking hard to never be that sort of Indian, if I can help it. She pauses here, takes a ragged breath. But what do you know, huh? Sometimes a monster isn't a metaphor for prejudice at all, plus or minus power. Sometimes it's just a monster. Hukulek stares at her like she's grown another head. What? She asks, yet again. What I just said, Tat. We should probably get going, if we're going to. Going to? Lewin apparently can't help prompting, carefully. Beg sighs, windily, as though about to deflate. Try. That's what I mean, she says, after a long moment's pause. To leave, I mean. Before they get here. They, Lewin repeats. They? Who? Now it's Beg's turn to stare, even as Hukulek, possibly just a tad swifter on the uptake, or simply paranoid enough to connect the dots without being asked, draws a sudden in-breath, a choked half-gasp, hugs herself haphazardly, grasping for comfort, but finding none. Lewin just stands there, visibly baffled. It doesn't make sense to her, any of it, and can't, really. Not in any scientific way. They were here first. That's what Gammy always told me. Dr. Begg. Anne-Marie remarked softly, as if to herself, hunted us like animals when we came into their territory, because that's what we must have seemed like to them, the same way they did to us. Things with some qualities of people, not people who just happen to look like things. So we fought back, because that's what we do. But there were more of them, and they were stronger, fought harder, started out taking us for food, then for slaves, then for breeding stock, changed so they could hide everywhere, hide inside of us. Neanderthals, Aretha says, and Homo habilis. Begg smiles slightly. The current theory, she replies, echoing Lewin, not looking round as she does, even to watch how Lewin, her cognitive refusal suddenly punctured, sharp and clean and quick, begins, at last, to buckle under her own words' weight. Behind them, the gravesite still gapes uncovered, rain-filled, ochre seeping. From above, Aretha muses, the unearthed cache of grave goods must look like a huge, slightly layered blood blotch, all that remains of some unspeakably old crime. An apology made on literally bended knees, pot sweetened with a pile of tools and corpses, yet left forever unaccepted. Hukulek, Tat, clears her throat, knuckles still knit and paling on either elbow. Complains, voice weak, but we didn't know. I did. You never said, though. No, course not, because I didn't want to think it was true. I mean, come on, Tat. Seriously, now. Would you? Well, no. Deep twilight. Now, under the trees, overlaid with even deeper silence. Deep enough Aretha can finally start to hear it once more, rising the same way her pain does, threading itself through her system. The song of the bones set shiver thrumming in every last wet, cold part of her. That note, that tone, so thin and distinct, a faraway cry drawing ever nearer. Like blood through some fossilized shell. And oh, Anne-Marie was right, not to want to, she thinks, faintly, as she feels her knees start to give way. As she droops, drops, ends up on hands and knees in the mud, the blood-smelling earth. I'm not even native, and I don't like that story much either. Not at all. Not at all. Who's that? Aretha can hear Lewin, Belize, call out, faintly, squinting past her, into the darkness. Adding, hopefully, as she does, Morgan, is that you, dear? To which Anne-Marie just shakes her head, while Tat begins to sob, and Aretha, looking up, seeing those familiar features hanging flat against the thickening curtain of night, mouth slack-hung and eyes empty, set ever so slightly askew. Doesn't even have to wait to hear the bones answer to know the trick of it already. To her sorrow, that skeletal shadow poised behind, head cocked, holding Morgan's skin up like an early Halloween mask with the scent of fresh-eaten liver on its breath. That line of similar shadows fan behind, making their stealthy, back-footed way towards them all, with claws outstretched. Don't worry, The bone song tells her from the inside out. As the Baycocks sweep in, this darkness is yours as much as ours. After all, a legacy passed down hand to hand from our common ancestors, where we are and were and have been, where you are now and always, the only place any of us have left to be. Not so different then, after all, cold comfort at best, and none at all at worst. Not that it really matters, either way. Every grave is our own. That's the very last thing Eritha Hausen has time to think before the earth opens up beneath her, before she falls headlong, wondering who will find her bones. And when, what tales they'll tell when dug free, what songs they'll sing when handled, how long it'll be, this time, before anyone stops to listen.